morning comes from the book of Genesis, and we're picking up the story of the matriarchs and patriarchs of our faith after Abraham. Beginning in chapter 25, verse 19. These are the descendants of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel the Aramean of Padan Aram, sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his prayer, and his wife Rebekah conceived. The children struggled together within her, and she said, "If it is to be this way, why do I live?" So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples born of you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The elder shall serve the younger." When her time came to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. First came out red, all his body like a hairy mantle, so they named him Esau. Afterward his brother came out with his hand gripping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man living in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he was fond of game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was famished. Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stuff, for I am famished." Therefore he was called Edom. Jacob said, "First, sell me your birthright." Esau said, "I'm about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank, and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
On May 6th, 2008, Scott Johnson and Sean Farmer were fishing and camping near Brushy Mountain in southwest Virginia. They had shared their dinner with a hiker named Randall Lee Smith, whom they had met on the nearby Appalachian Trail. Randall thanked them politely for the meal of fried trout and beans, and then took a gun out of his pocket and calmly started shooting from one to the other. The first bullet hit Sean in the temple, the next hit Scott in the back. Then Randall shot Sean in the chest and Scott in the back of the neck. Scott scrambled into the woods and Sean moved toward his truck. Randall followed Sean towards the truck and raised his gun again. 27 years earlier, in 1981, along the same stretch of the Appalachian Trail, this same person, Randall Smith, had murdered and buried two hikers along the trail, Susan Ramsey and Robert Montford Jr. The two hikers were 27-year-old social workers from Maine who had set out on the trail to raise funds for the mentally ill. Randall was convicted of their murders and served time in prison, but had eventually been released. No motive had ever been established for these 1981 murders by Randall. He returned home and did odd jobs for a few years. He continued to receive, he continued to live in his southwest Virginia home with his mother until she died in 2000. After the inheritance he received from her ran out, he packed up his few belongings and disappeared into the woods along the Appalachian Trail. Just a few weeks later, he accepted the invitation of Scott Johnson and Sean Farmer to join them for a meal of fried trout and beans. Creation gone awry. This has been the story of humanity since Adam and Eve. This has been our legacy. Left to our own devices, this is the history we seem fated to repeat over and over. What have you done? Laments our God. Listen, your brother's blood is crying to me out of the ground, and now you are cursed. So Cain was cursed for murdering his own brother Abel, and that curse, it seems, continues to live on. But has not God acted to turn the curse into a blessing? Did not God call Abraham and Sarah to follow him and promise that through them all the families of the earth will be blessed? Did we not see the power of God's faithfulness, even when Abraham and Sarah were unfaithful, to finally engender faith in them? Does not this then give us another story who defines who we are, a new legacy? One of God's making and not our own. A new history that we can look forward to seeing repeat over and over again. We are no longer like Cain and Abel, children of Adam and Eve, who brought about the curse of sin and with it alienation from God and one another. Instead, we are children of Abraham through faith in Christ. We are children not of the curse, but of the promise. We are children of the blessing. When Randall Smith had followed Sean Farmer to Sean's truck and raised his gun to fire at Sean again, the gun misfired. He'd run out of ammunition. While he reloaded, Sean started the truck and raced away. Scott Johnson, who had run into the woods after being shot by Randall, came running and jumped into the truck. The two began a wild ride down the mountain. They had left Scott's truck with the keys in the ignition back at the campsite. They had no idea if Randall was following them in Scott's truck or not. Bleeding profusely from their bullet wounds with no cell phone reception, they zigzagged and careened down that mountain. And what happened? Well, in the end, they made it. They reached a home where they asked for help. Both were rushed to hospitals. Mercifully, Scott Johnson and Sean Farmer both survived the second known attack of Randall Smith. Randall had almost repeated his legacy, but not quite. Yet Susan Ramsey and Robert Munford Jr., Randall's victims in 1981, had not escaped. The history of Cain and Abel, the legacy of alienation from God and its aftermath of murder, had been repeated. And so it continues to this day. So what do we make of the promises of God now? Already in the biblical story, early in the second generation after Abraham and Sarah, one has to wonder if the promises of God will be able to stand the test of time. Yet Isaac had been faithful like Abraham, but he had been the only child of Sarah, at least, and did not have a full sibling like Cain and Abel to contend with. But what of Isaac's children, Jacob and Esau? Even before they are born, we learn that there will be trouble, as Rebekah is told by God that two peoples born of you shall be divided. And so she gives birth to Esau and Jacob, with Jacob being born second, but with his hand gripping Esau's heel. The murder of Abel at the hands of his brother Cain was the direct result of humanity's alienation from God. Yet since that time, God has reconciled his relationship to a pair of humans, Abraham and Sarah. But they are now dead and gone. We are left to ask if their past reconciliation with God will have any effect on future generations or on humans in general. If this relationship between Jacob and Esau is any clue about the power of God's promises, the future looks grim indeed. The brothers do not get along. They have nothing in common, and the younger one connives to take the birthright from his older brother. Of course, it only gets worse later in the story when Jacob, the younger brother, with the help of his mother Rebekah, connives to trick Isaac into giving his blessing not to the eldest Esau, but to Jacob himself. the blessing. The promises of God to Abraham and Sarah to be a great nation, a numerous people, a blessing to all the families of the earth. That blessing, they were going to steal it. Jacob plans to steal this blessing from Esau, and he does. Isaac is tricked and blesses Jacob. And how does Jacob respond? Jacob says, "The days of mourning for my father are approaching. Then I will kill my brother Jacob." Is it Cain and Abel all over again? Has the promise failed? Will the curse in the end triumph? One may look at the world and wonder. But one does not have to look at the murders on the Appalachian Trail to be given pause. One only has to look at one's own family. We have all been given, or perhaps leaving, legacies like Jacob and Esau, or as the plot thickens later in Genesis, like the two sisters, Leah and Rachel, whom Jacob marries. Histories of sibling rivalry, injuries given and received, black sheep that no one talks about, broken relationships that fester, slights real and imagined, addictions, abuses, neglect. If family relationships are a sign, one way or another, of whether or not we are reconciled to God, then what do our own families tell us about our faith? It can all seem hopeless at times. The desire of Esau to kill his brother Jacob can ring all too true. Reconciliation among ourselves, the sign of a healed relationship with our God, can sometimes seem to be an unattainable goal. Jacob, fearing his brother Esau's wrath, will eventually flee. Like Scott Johnson and Sean Farmer, he is able to escape the wrath of his would-be killer, at least for now. And in fleeing, Jacob has bought himself time. Interestingly, up until now, time has been the enemy of God's promises, threatening to undo them. But suddenly, time is now on the side of God's promises. Time which had allowed the material creations of God to decay and die, now has the opportunity to work on the anger of Esau and the broken relationship between the two brothers. Time which drove even Abraham and Sarah to impatience with God's promises now has the chance to allow God's final reconciliation with Abraham and Sarah to possibly, just maybe, take root in a new generation between a conniving younger brother and a vengeful older one. Will the promises of God in fact take root and produce the fruit of reconciliation in the most unlikely of soils? And if there is hope for these two brothers and their families, is there hope for us and ours? Time will tell. That is to say, what will you do with the time you have left in life? Let it pass without reflection. Remember, fruitful soil, like the soil in Jesus' parable of the sower, is cultivated soil. The fruit of reconciliation does not grow in the wild on its own. God, as the farmer, has cultivated the hard soil of our hearts, produced faith in Christ. The church is now the laborers who work the fields to spread this harvest to our families, our friends, and our community. You are never too young to begin, for this work is a skill that must be learned over time. And you are never too old to plant the seeds of reconciliation, which, like an acorn, continues to grow long after we are gone and leave a legacy of life, the blessing of God for future generations to enjoy. Let all God's people